What's up, guys? My name is Josh, and this is FAB 201, episode number 5. Today we're going to be talking about brewing Everfest. In particular, we're going to be talking about Dorinthea. This is a deck that I've been tinkering with the last couple weeks, and I've had some good success with it, and I've learned what works, what doesn't work, and I thought this would be a good time to talk about how to build a deck from the ground up, step by step. So we're going to be going through that. Normally I tell you, at this point, I tell you like what's coming up next week. I don't quite know what's coming up next week. We'll play it by ear. We'll cross that bridge when we cross that bridge. So anyways, let's just jump into today's episode. So today's episode is all about Dorinthea. And Dorinthea traditionally is played with the Dawnblade. So you have to ask yourself, why are you experimenting with other weapons? Well, the main reason is because Everfest came with a lot of new cards that enhanced the dual wielding style of play for warriors. So new decks generally start with a solid idea. So the idea here is we have all these new cards. The metagame is quite fresh. Let's see what we can do with these new cards. So in addition, this is a mid-range deck. So I think building mid-range decks and control decks at the very, very beginning of the format is a little bit more difficult. So currently it is week 2 going into week 3 of the ProQuest season. So there's been some metagame developments. We've seen kind of what the top couple decks are, what the pillars of the format are. That allows us to build a deck with a little bit more focus towards beating those decks. We know what decks we have to beat, and we know their general play pattern and strategy, and we can develop a strategy to counter that. So we're talking about some new cards. Let's take a look at some of those new cards. All right. So in particular, there are some new tools from Everfest. We have Slice and Dice, Blade Runner, In the Swing, and Outland Skirmish. All of these cards were designed basically for dual-wielding warriors. Slice and Dice does stipulate, though, that it has to be a sword, so that's a little bit narrow. Blade Runner is just an amazing card. It works with both styles of play, axes or sabers. In the Swing actually can be used in the traditional two-handed build, but generally with the Dawnblade you want to ensure that your first attack hits, not your second. So In the Swing is not really used in that. And Outland Skirmish is kind of like a mini Spoils of War. It's a good role-playing card. It's basically a better Sharpened Steel if you're playing one-handed weapons. So with these new tools came the improvement of old tools. In particular, Valiant Dynamo. This is a card that when it came out, people were very, very hyped about. However, the Monarch meta did not really allow for... the right tools were not in place yet for this card to really shine. However, with these new tools, the Valiant Dynamo is much, much better. Spill Blood is another card that was missing support. In order to get your weapon to have go again, you had to rely on things like Warrior's Valor and Hit and Run, and those were not so reliable. Cards like Cash In obviously get better with the printing of Outland Skirmish. And finally, cards like Hit and Run actually it's easier to trigger the +3 bonus on that card now that you can go Blade Runner into Hit and Run. So these are some of the new tools that Warrior got. And with those new tools, we can kind of think about a deck. So the very first thing that we have to consider is axes versus sabers. So I've actually played both of these, and it is... I'm going to just say that initially I thought that sabers were better. However, the because of the way that the energy lines up. However, I believe that the axes overall are actually stronger now because this style of play actually requires dominate more often than not to finish the game. So you're going to see later in the build that we have things like push forward and spill blood, obviously, to ensure that things hit. So let's just quickly compare these two weapons here. So the Hatchet of Body, Hatchet of Mind, if you attack with one of them and you attack with the other one, it gets boosted to 3. So you attack for 2 and then you attack for 3 in a 2-hit combo. If you go with a 3-hit combo, you go 2 into 3 into 3, that's 8. So whereas the sabers will just go 2 into 2 or 2 into 2 into 2. So as you can see, the axes actually have a higher base damage. And they also have access to spill blood. On the other side, the Centauri sabers have access to Slice and Dice. So Slice and Dice says that it has to be a sword or dagger. Twinning Blade only targets swords. Razor Reflex only targets swords. Or daggers, I guess. And Courage of Bladehold only applies to swords. So overall, the Centauri Saber build actually lacks... You might think that one base damage difference on the second attack is not that much, but it adds up over time quite a bit. And I think the hatchets are more likely to get over the line, especially against control decks. So we're going to be brewing with the hatchets instead of the sabers, and that's kind of the reason why. So, how do we build a deck from the ground up? Well, I like to break it down into several steps. The very first thing that you need to do is figure out your desired overall strategy and game plan. Basically, how does your deck intend to win? If you remember some of the previous lessons, this is one of the very first things I talked about, is that at all times you should know what your deck's win con is. Alright? So that's why we do that first. Second, we add the no-brainer main deck cards. They're cards that obviously are going to make the cut here, such as Blade Runner, Glib the Quicksilver, etc. 3, we could create a maybe board consisting of the red and yellow cards. Why the red and yellow cards? Because the red and yellow cards are the cards that we're more likely to play out. So these cards, because we're going to play them out, they need to synergize in some way. So we're going to create a maybe board, and at the moment, because there's only 6 sets of cards, it's actually very easy to just go through literally every single card that you can play and throw it in the maybe board if you think it has some play. And then you could cut it down from there. Next, step 4, you need to create a stable and useful mana base. So in this case, the blues are very, very important. With this deck, I think we ended up at 19 or 20 blues. And this is actually where there's a little bit of diversity here. You could really tune your mana base to how you like. And I will give you some criteria later to show which cards could, why we're picking certain cards to be part of our energy base. Then we'll add some equipment. That'll generally it's going to be pretty straightforward with this deck to do that. However, that sometimes the equipment actually dictates a lot of the strategy. So this may not be step 5 for every single deck here. Okay. Finally, we'll consolidate the list. We'll test it. We'll refine it. And we'll get better every day, right? All right. So let's talk about our overall strategy. So this deck is built around Valiant Dynamo. This is going to be a mid-range deck that's going to try to get as much value from Valiant Dynamo as possible. So you see these cards that I displayed here. If we pitch a blue, attack with the Hatchet of Body, play Blade Runner as an attack reaction, and then swing Hatchet of Mind, and then remove a Dynamo counter, we dealt 2 damage, 6 damage, and we healed 1 point of damage because we took the -1 armor counter off of the Dynamo. So with just 2 cards, we got 9 points of value. Everything in the Warrior deck basically blocks for 3. So you could block for 6 and return 9 points of value. So your deck is actually outputting 15 points of value, which most decks can output 12 points of value with their hand of 4. So you consistently do this again and again and again and again, and you accrue value over the course of the game, and your opponents will die from 20 or 30 instances of damage, basically. So because we're Warrior, we also have access to some solid finishers. Once they get low, once they're forced to block, we have things like Route to finish the game, right? So that's our general strategy. So let's move on to step number 2. So step number 2 is we add our no-brainer cards. So for this deck, here are the no-brainers. So we're going to add the Rainbow of Blade Runner. We're going to add the Rainbow of Hit and Run. We're going to add our Dynamo, obviously. The Spoils of War gives us Go Again unconditionally, so that's going to make it. Spill Blood is an amazing card with the axes, so obviously that goes in. And Glint the Quicksilver is one of the best cards in the game, so that's obviously going in as well. Okay, so next we're going to look at the red and yellow maybes. So here, I basically went through every single card, and if I considered it, I put it on this list here. And then I went through again and thought about whether or not this card is good enough. Okay, so we're going to go through each of these, and I'll try to be concise but thorough, if that makes sense. Okay, so starting off with Snatch. Because we don't have access to Razor Reflex, this eventually became a maybe. This Snatch also allows you to return damage with just 1 card. However, we have to think about the context of the metagame. So the metagame is Starvo, Viserai, and Prism. Viserai and Prism can deal with Snatch pretty easily. Viserai has quite a bit of armor, and Prism has her shields. So Snatch is not the greatest metagame play, and Starvo has the Crown of Seeds plus a block. It's not too hard for them to block it either. So eventually, I just put this in the maybe category. Scar for Scar, this is a card that, again, I don't think this is quite where we want to be, because if we have Go Again, we probably could utilize a 2-card hand better. And if we don't have Go Again, then we rather play Snatch. So Enlightened Strike, this card I believe is actually pretty key to this deck because it allows you to turn any 2-card hand into 7 damage. And against the Starvo deck, you may need to use your blue to play Unmovable, so having Enlightened Strike is really, really nice in that situation. It also allows you to punch through damage against Oldhim. I believe Enlightened Strike is quite important. Flock of the Featherwalkers, this is a card that I initially had in, and the fact is that it's the Tunic counter is generally used for Shunt, and if you're using the Tunic counter for Flock, it feels kind of slow. The deck already has a ton of ways to give Go Again. It's not like you're starving for sources of Go Again. You're actually starving for ways to push damage. And Flock just doesn't do it. Command and Conquer, this card is pretty good. It is great against Prism, obviously, because it's a 6-power card. In addition, because you attack in a pretty decently wide pattern, you may be able to bait out some blocks on your first or second attack and then come in with Command and Conquer at the end of the chain. It becomes pretty difficult to block. And Command and Conquer also slows down the game, which is exactly what you want to do with this deck. Nourishing Emptiness, this is a card that I believe if you're playing E-Strike and CNC, the chance of Nourishing punching through is kind of low. And like I said, the metagame at the moment, it's kind of easy for them to block the Nourishing Emptiness. So I think that's actually a little bit of a trap card, although that is quite good in Dorinthea traditionally. So we move over to the warrior attack actions here. Oath of Steel, this just does not generate enough threat. It's at best 4 damage, but generally this is going to be just 2. So I didn't quite think this was good enough unless you can get like a 4-hit combo. Eventually Oath of Steel will be good, but I don't think it's quite good enough in this deck. So perhaps the the most surprising here is I said no to Steelblade Supremacy. This deck does not run enough attack reactions to ensure that things hit. And giving +2 to a weapon is going to bring it to 4 on hit, draw card. That's going to get blocked all day long. Especially, it's the same reasoning behind Snatch, basically. In addition, this costs 1 energy. You're going to see that there's a very high bar for things that cost 1 energy in this deck. So Push Forward Red is actually a very important card because this allows the play pattern of, if you have a Tunic, this allows you to push a ton of damage on your second attack, especially if you have Blade Runner. This allows you to push 9 on the second attack, which is pretty insane. And the energy just lines up really nicely. This deck needs the ability to push damage through with Dominate, basically. Warrior's Valor Red. This card, if we were running more attack reactions, this would be a good card, but conditional go again is not good. This is just going to... They're just going to block for 5 generally on this and move on. Warrior's Valor is really a card that needs other cards to synergize with it, so that means you're going to need a 3-card hand. And our deck is generally going to want to operate at a 2-card hand level. Outland Skirmish, this is a great card because it's cost 0, gives a buff, and it generates copper. And I think copper is actually one of the ways that this deck can accrue advantages over the course of the game, because people are not likely to block your attacks because nothing has an on-hit effect. If the on-hit effect is copper, people are like, well, okay, that's fine. It's not like draw a card. It's not like discard a card. It's not like something major, right? So they're quite incentivized to just let you get your copper. Second Swing, this card, Push Forward is just better. Because Push Forward actually has more flexibility, and Second Swing is just, it's just not enough. It's narrow, and it's just not enough oomph, basically. You'll notice that in order to use Second Swing, basically you have to use your Tunic, because 2 axe swings is 2 energy. Generally, you're going to use Blade Runner to give your stuff go again, so that's already 3. So if you're playing anything before your Second Swing, I shouldn't say Second Swing, before your second attack, such as Second Swing, you're going to have to use your Tunic, basically. So the bar for that is quite high. So yeah, that's the warrior attack actions. Let's move on to some more cards that I considered. So in the Swing Red, this is basically a finishing card, and I think this is actually a very, very nice finishing card because this does not require Tunic to finish the game. And oftentimes, certain opponents will block your first attack, and then if you give your second attack go again, they're going to block your second attack so that your hero ability doesn't trigger, so you can't attack a third time. So In the Swing is actually very valuable for that situation. Out for Blood, this is a okay card. However, to get the most value out of it, you have to get the Reprise. And people generally, from what I've seen, don't block your first axe. It's for 2 damage. And they're thinking, well, if he has glint and I block, that's bad. If I block with the 3, block against his 2, I'm losing value. So generally, every single time I've attacked with my axe, people just let it through. Unless they're Starvo and then they crown plus block with the shield. But almost everybody will just let your first attack hit. So you're not really getting the maximum value out of Out for Blood. So that's why I put it under maybe. Route, this is just one of the best finishing cards in Warrior. I advocate towards playing one basically always. This is just, even though we're not going to run Singing Steelblade, having Route in your deck is just too nice. It's too good of a finisher. Especially considering all you need is a blue plus Route and you're actually threatening a lot of damage. Biting Blade Red is similar to Out for Blood. You're not going to really get the value from the reprise. Overpower Red. This is a card that, unless you're swimming in blues, I don't think it's really that great of a card. Blue Overpower, though, which we'll talk about later, I think is a good card. Singing Steel Blade. This is a card, just like Out for Blood and Biting Blade, you're not going to get the reprise very often until super late game, and by then, if you're running multiple Singing Steel Blades, they're just going to get clogged in your hand. If you're running just one, you may not have it at the right time late game. So that's why I put it into maybe, and then I'm leaning towards actually not playing that. All right, so let's look at some sideboard cards here. Sink Below, this is a all-star card in the format. I think you just need to have enough defense reactions against Starvo. If you're not running at least 9, you're just going to get run over. So Sink Below makes it. Fate Foreseen, this is a card where I'm a little on the fence about. It's more of, if I have enough slots, I'll play Fate Foreseen. If I feel like the Starvos are really becoming a larger portion of the metagame, I'll play Fate Foreseen. Red Unmovable, this is a very key card. Red Unmovable plus your armor allows you to survive a lot of the powerful turns that Starvo can put out. And Unmovable plus Red Steelblade Shunt, these two cards are really, really important for just making sure you don't get overwhelmed by Starvo. So yes to both of them. Lead the Charge Red. This card is actually very, very useful in the current metagame because the current Prism builds, they like to run a ton of auras, and Lead the Charge is one of the best ways for you to kill multiple auras, to basically play whack-a-mole and make sure that they don't overwhelm you. So yeah, I would run 3 Lead the Charges. In terms of utility cards, we're going to play Cash In. We have Spoils of War, we have Outland Skirmish. I think the upside of 1 Cash In is quite high. And the final card that I considered was Talisman of Warfare. This is a new card from Everfest that says when a source deals exactly 2 damage to an opposing hero, destroy it, and all cards in all arsenals. So guess what does 2 damage? Your first attack. So now it's like, all right, I'm going to swing Talisman. I'm going to swing my axe with Talisman of Warfare on the board. If you take 2, you lose your arsenal. So that might be a good card. We'll see. Okay, so after we add all these things, we need to create a useful mana base. So how do we do that? Well, we obviously have to add a certain amount of blue cards, right? So blue cards can come in... The criteria for them, I split it into 3 different things. They're either no-brainers, such as Glint the Quicksilver. They're just too good. Obviously, we're going to play it. Or Blue Blade Runner. These cards are just so good, we're just putting them in. We have cards that are very good on the second cycle of the deck. So on the second cycle, this deck is actually very likely to see the second cycle of the deck. And this deck is, if we're not running Singing Steelblade, it's not going to shuffle. So if we get to the second cycle of the deck, cards such as Push Forward gain value because you need Dominate to close the game out. The third type of cards that I would consider for the mana base are cards that are great if you draw multiple blues. Sometimes you're going to draw 3 or 4 blues and you're going to have the tempo And you want to ensure that even if you flood with energy, you can still find a way to utilize that. And so things that cost quite a bit, such as Driving Blade, which costs 2, Overpower, which costs 3, those are good candidates for this. All right. So let's take a look at all of the possible blues that I considered here. So, like I said, Driving Blade costs 2. Even though the effect is not very good, it is useful for when we flood. Blue Steel Blade Shunt. This is a decent one-of in most decks. This is a card that if you could get them down to 1 and you know that they're somewhat reliant on their weapon, you can ensure that you basically have won the game. Blue Overpower, same thing as Driving Blade. This card is great when you draw multiples. And this is actually it's possible to finish the game with a Blue Overpower as well. We have Blue Warrior's Valor. Again, I'm not a huge fan of conditional go again because we don't have that many attack reactions. So that's kind of on the maybe board. Out for Blood Blue, similar to why we're not really into Out for Blood Red. Blue Push Forward, this card is great. We're running the reds, we're running the blues because this allows us to ensure that our second attack hits and it allows us to push damage. Blue Biting Blade, this card is not going to get reprise generally, so I'd rather have Driving Blade if I have to pay 2 here. Nature's Path Pilgrimage, this is pretty good in the Dawnblade build. However, I think this lacks a little bit of power in the axe build because you're basically going to bring your first axe up to 3, and then they're just going to clean block that basically. Same thing with Outland Skirmish, you're just going to generally bring your attack up to 2. Although you could use this with the second attack, that might be better. Time Snap Potion, I think this is a very, very important card. Again, Prism is a giant part of the metagame, so you're going to need some Time Snap Potions. Energy Potion is not so useful here, I think, because of the way that the energy lines up. You aren't going to really need the extra energy here. Even if they do things like Blizzard, you're not really you're not so sad. You could just play for the longer game. It should be okay generally. Heart of Fendel, this is another card that, like, Warrior is one of the few classes that can actually use Heart of Fendel. I would say that this is a card that you can experiment with. It seems fine. Pursuit of Knowledge, this is a card that I tried out. This just has trouble connecting and it blocks for 2. And there are better 2-card hands than pitching a yellow or blue and playing Pursuit of Knowledge. Last Ditch Effort, this card actually I think has some use in this deck because this deck actually could go to Fatigue against very defensive Guardian decks. And Last Ditch Effort is really, really easy to set up in the end game for that. That might be the extra push that the deck needs. It also blocks for 3. So it has its role there. Another blue card that blocks for 3 that I tried out is This Round's on Me. My thought process was that this would be good against Prism because if they have 5-6 auras out and you play this, you can kind of block 6 essentially. However, that's basically playing not to lose instead of playing to win. So once you get to the point where they have 5 or 6 auras out, you've already lost. Things have already gotten out of control, so you don't want to do that. Especially letting them draw an extra card means that they could probably put out a 4-cost aura easier, or they could draw that 4-cost aura. So this is a good card for other situations, I think. This is the situation where you want to play it against Prism is just doesn't quite make sense. Talisman of Balance. This is a kind of interesting card that I looked at. It's a card that says if you have at your end phase, if you have less cards than your opponent in your arsenal, you destroy it and put the top card of your deck into an empty arsenal zone you control. The only thing that's kind of holding this back is that it doesn't block. And at the moment, having things that block is quite useful. So this is a card that I think you could play around with, though. Because, I mean, it's a blue. That's the thing. So that if this was a yellow or red, there's no way this would be good enough. And finally, Talisman of Tides. This is another kind of silver bullet card against Starvo. It says if they would draw one or more cards during your action phase, they draw that many -1. So if they're trying to get value out of Crown on your turn, they basically won't, they can't unless they want to run into Talisman of Tides. So I think this card actually has some potential. This may not be the deck for it, but I think that in the current metagame, that's a consideration. All right. So we've looked at a ton of cards. Now let's look at some equipment. All right, so this should be pretty straightforward here. We're running the Skull Cap because the Helm of Sharp Eye is just not good enough in this deck, where we don't actually pump our weapon attack that much, and the cost of it and the fact that the deck is not built to take advantage of that ability is just not good enough. We run Courage and we run Tunic because in certain matchups, such as versus Starvo, we want the Courage of Bladehold to block. It doesn't matter that we're running Hatchets. We're just going to run Courage for the 2 block and then the 1 block because it's just that important. However, against decks that we don't need to block as much, we can run Tunic, or if we Tunic basically allows us to every 3 turns we have 4 energy. And 4 energy is very nice in this deck because it allows you to attack 3 times with your axes plus a hit and run and a blade runner and a blue. So that's a massive amount of damage basically. We run Brave Forge Bracers here mainly for the block. Once in a blue moon, if you go hit and run into axe, they don't block, then you can go Brave Forge Bracers into Hatchet of Mine for 4. Not bad. You have to be very careful using the Brave Forge Bracers because it does break the combat chain. And if they're running the shield, they're going to get massive value out of that. So don't use the bracers against the shield. Obviously, we're running our hatchets. Hatchet of Body, Hatchet of Mind. We have our Valiant Dynamo. And we also have the Null Rune Suite here. So the reasoning behind this is our deck is not fast enough to just race down Wizard. And I think in the previous metagame, if you were fast enough and you had Skullcap, you might have been okay against Wizard. However, the Wizard could kill you from a pretty high life total these days. So your Skullcap's basically never going to be on because of Aether Wildfire. Even though Wizard is not a large percentage of the metagame, you're already playing 1 Null Rune against Viscerize. So it's basically, do you want to sacrifice 2 sideboard slots to not lose to Wizard? Probably worth it, because I think this deck does not beat Wizard without AB3, because it's just too slow. So we're running the Null Rune there, and we'll probably pair that with the Vendel Spring Tunic against Kano. Alright, so that's our equipment. We have 10 pieces of it. So, here's our final deck list. So, as you can see, we have 41 reds, 7 yellows, 22 blues, and 10 equipment. And the 3 time stat potions are actually in the sideboards. So generally we're running 19 blues in our 60 card deck. So if you watched the previous episode, I talked about the hypergeometric calculator and my rule of thumb, 80 and 90%. So this deck is basically 80% to have a blue. And this deck, as long as it has a blue, can do quite a bit of things. Quite a bit of value-based things, basically. So let's just go over the deck list really quickly here. So we have Blade Runner, Command and Conquer, E-Strike, Fate Foreseen, hit and run, in the swing, lead the charge, outland skirmish, push forward, rout, sink below, spill blood, spoils of war, steel blade shunt, unmovable. Those are our reds. We have blade runner, single copy of cash in, hit and run as our yellows. And then as our blues, we have blade runner, driving blade, glint the quicksilver, hit and run, last ditch effort, overpower, push forward, and time snap potion. So, I know I'm going to get questions about the sideboards, so let's go over those. Let's talk about how to use those. Okay, so on the right here, you can see the 48 card main deck. These are cards that I would use in every single matchup, in every single situation. All right. So you see we have the rainbow hit and runs and blade runners. We have our 2 in the swings. We have 3 outland skirmishes, 3 E-strikes, our red and blue push forwards, our route to finish the game, spill blood, spoils of war, glint, and we have 2 copies of driving blade, 3 overpowers, and a single copy of cash in. This gives us 48 cards. So the rest of the cards are in the sideboard. So let's talk about the matchup versus Starvo and the matchup versus Prism. So against Starvo, I'm going to be running the Skullcap, the Courage, the Bracers, and the Dynamo. This gives us the most armor possible. Obviously, we're going to run the Hatchets as well. And basically, we're just going to throw in all of the defense reactions, and we're going to add the 2 last-ditch efforts to bring our blue count from 17 up to 19. You're always basically bringing in at least 2 blues. Yeah. So that will give us 61 cards there. And yep, so that's what I would do against Starvo. Against Prism, we're going to be running the Skullcap, the Tunic, the Bracers, and the Dynamo with the Hatchets. And in this matchup, we're going to bring in the 3 CNCs, the 3 lead the charges, the 2 sink belows, and the 3 time snap potions. So yeah, so you can see just between those 2, we've basically utilized everything in our sideboard. I'll leave the rest of the matchups for you to discover on your own. So we have, now that we've walked through the whole process of building the deck, let's wrap things up here. All right, so in order to build a deck, there's a reason why this is episode 5. Episode 2, 3, and 4 are kind of to get us to this point. In order to build a strong deck, we need to understand our strategy, what type of in-game lines and tactics we're going for. In this case, we're trying to pitch a blue, swing with Blade Runner, swing, remove the Dynamo counter. Understanding the tactics and lines that we're going for and understanding the play patterns that we're going for, coupled with the math, so having 19 blues, will help us build a stronger deck. So utilizing all the things that we learned in episode 2, 3, and 4 brings us here to episode 5. Building a deck is a multi-step process. You saw how we went through 6 different steps there. Each step logically just makes sense. We obviously have, the first step is figuring out how we intend to win. Then we added our no-brainer cards. Then we added all the red and yellow cards that we considered. Then we added cards that we would consider for our mana base. Then we added our equipment. Then we refined, consolidated, and tested the deck. Now, speaking of testing and refinement, that is actually the most important step of this whole process. There's a lot of times where things look good on paper, but then you play them and you're like, well, it just doesn't quite line up correctly. There were several cards that I tested and figured out they were bad. Steelblade Supremacy is perhaps the most shocking. Steelblade Supremacy, Flock of the Featherwalkers, Pursuit of Knowledge. These are cards that look great on paper, but they just didn't quite line up correctly with what the deck is trying to do, especially in the context of the metagame. All right. So yeah, I hope that you guys will, if you guys are Axe Story players, or just lovers of Warrior, you can take this out for a spin at your Armory or your ProQuest. If not, I hope that you at least understood the basics of how to build a deck from the ground up. Yeah, so that's all for now. I'll see you guys next week. Have a good day. See ya.